Chapter 1. Waking in the Past. Lena's eyes fluttered open, the light seeping through the curtains too bright, too harsh. Her head felt like it was wrapped in cotton, her mind sluggish, a thick fog clouding her thoughts. She blinked, trying to clear the confusion that seemed to hang over her like a dense mist. The last thing she remembered was sitting at her desk, her laptop open, her final thesis in front of her. She had been exhausted, suffocating under the weight of deadlines, and then sleep. But now, as she tried to sit up, everything around her was wrong. The bed was too soft, the sheets too heavy, and this room, didn't look anything like her tiny apartment. It was ornate, with plush, vintage furniture, golden trinkets, and a large mirror framed in dark wood. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern, clearly old but somehow luxurious. Lena could almost taste the age of the room, the remnants of a time long past. Her heart began to race. She was no longer in the world she knew. She stood up quickly, her legs shaky as she approached the large mirror on the wall, desperate to see her reflection. Please let this be a dream, she thought, but the face staring back at her wasn't the tired, disheveled version of herself she'd seen in the mirror just hours ago. It was her, but not her. The young woman in the reflection wore a delicate pale pink dress that looked out of place, as though it had been plucked from another time. The hairstyle was elegant, intricate braids pinned at the back of her head. She touched her face, smooth skin, no trace of the exhaustion she'd felt just hours before. It wasn't just her appearance that was wrong. Her body felt unfamiliar, as though she were wearing someone else's skin. The soft cotton of the dress itched against her skin, a stark contrast to the casual clothes she remembered wearing when she'd fallen asleep. Her mind scrambled to make sense of it, but the thoughts were too scattered, too disjointed. Her breath caught in her throat as a sudden realization hit her. This wasn't her life. She was in the body of someone else. What's happening? Lena murmured, looking around the room as though expecting someone to pop in and explain. But the room was silent. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to figure it out. The memories started to flood, and then not her own but someone else's. Lena's son, adopted daughter of the prestigious Sun family, orphaned as a child after her family's tragic death. She had been taken in by the Sun family, a favor to a family friend, not an act of genuine love or care. Lena, the adopted daughter, was always on the periphery of the family's affections. Her hands shook as she clutched the edge of the vanity. Lena's son? The name felt unfamiliar on her tongue, as though she were trying it on for the first time. This wasn't her life. This wasn't her story. She wasn't just in someone else's life, she was living it. She tried to remember how she had ended up here. Had she died? Had exhaustion taken her life in the middle of writing her thesis? Was this some strange afterlife? But no, there was a clarity here she couldn't ignore. She was fully aware, fully present. This wasn't an ethereal dream, nor was it the realm of the dead. This was real. The door creaked open and Lena spun around, her heart thudding in her chest. She was terrified of what she might find, who she might see. Was this some twisted trick, a game of fate? A young woman entered, dressed in a simple maid's uniform, and looked at Lena with wide eyes. "Miss Lena, you're awake." The woman's voice was soft, reverent, but there was something familiar in the way she said it, something that made Lena's stomach twist. "Where am I?" Lena's voice came out hoarse, uncertain. The maid's eyes blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "Miss Lena, you're in your room, of course. Are you feeling unwell?" Lena's throat went dry. This was too much. Her room. It felt wrong, like a foreign land. She took a deep breath. I need to get out of here." The maid seemed startled but quickly recovered, stepping forward to offer assistance. "But Miss Lena, the Sun family is expecting you for breakfast. Master Wei is already downstairs." Lena's mind froze. Master Wei. Her heart skipped a beat. Name. Sun Wei. The eldest son of the Sun family. The one she had loved hopelessly for so long. She shook her head, trying to clear the dizziness that had begun to invade her thoughts. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be her life. The maid hesitated for a moment before offering her a gentle smile. "Shall I help you get ready, Miss Lena?" Lena stared at her, still grappling with the overwhelming strangeness of the situation. What was going on? She couldn't remember how she had gotten here, couldn't recall how she had fallen asleep the night before, yet here she was, trapped in someone else's life. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. She couldn't let panic take over. She had to find out what was happening, why she was here, and how she could get back to her real life. But more than that, she had to figure out what to do about Sun Wei, the cold, distant man she had once adored. The man whose indifference had broken her heart. For now, all she could do was move forward and somehow find a way back to herself. Chapter 2: The Sun Family's World. The morning sun cast long, soft rays through the window as Lena stood in front of the full-length mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. She had been dressed in a formal pale blue gown by the maid, and though the fabric was rich and elegant, it felt almost too heavy on her. Too different from the comfortable clothes she had worn just days before. But there was no denying the reality of it now. She was no longer in her tiny, cluttered apartment, working on her thesis late into the night. No, this was a different world, one that seemed both familiar and foreign at the same time. Lena's Sun, the adopted daughter of the Sun family, had no place in this world. Not in the way the others did. She was an outsider, a shadow of the family's true bloodline, relegated to the fringes despite the wealth and status the Sun name afforded her. The maid finished adjusting the intricate braid in her hair and gave her a nervous smile. "Miss Lena, the family is waiting for you in the dining room." Lena nodded, her stomach nodding. She had no idea what to expect. The Sun family was a name that echoed throughout society, known for their wealth and influence. But Lena had always been more of an afterthought in the family, a reminder of some old, unspoken promise. She had never truly felt like she belonged here. As she walked down the long hallway toward the dining room, each step felt heavier. The grand staircase loomed ahead, its marble steps gleaming under the sunlight. The walls were adorned with portraits of Sun family ancestors, their faces cold and stoic, their eyes following her every move. The very air around her felt oppressive, as though it were charged with expectations that she could never meet. She reached the dining room door and paused, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. The room was vast, with an imposing dining table that stretched across the center. At the head of the table sat an older man, Sun Yi, the patriarch of the family, his face stern and unforgiving. Beside him, his wife, Madame Sun, sat with her hands neatly folded in her lap. Both of them gave Lena a cursory glance as she entered, though their expressions didn't shift much. On the other side of the table was Sun Wei, the eldest son. His presence filled the room despite his quiet demeanor. He was engrossed in a conversation with his younger brother, Sun Jun, who was laughing at something Sun Wei had said, his eyes bright and carefree. Sun Wei, however, remained stoic as always, his dark eyes cold, his expression unreadable. Lena's heart fluttered at the sight of him, though she quickly pushed the feelings down. No more. She had to remind herself that she was no longer the girl who dreamed of a future with him. She had made that decision the moment she realized how foolish it was to keep hoping for something that would never come. Sun Wei barely spared her a glance as she walked in, though there was a subtle shift in the air as she entered the room. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second longer than it should have, and Lena quickly looked away, her pulse racing. She couldn't let herself be distracted by him. Not now. "Ah, Lena," Sunny said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "It's good that you've finally joined us. We have matters to discuss today." Lena bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement, her throat dry. She had no idea what he meant by matters, but the weight of his gaze was enough to make her uneasy. She took her seat at the table next to Madame Sun, who gave her a polite but distant smile. The tension in the air was palpable as breakfast was served. The servants moved quickly and efficiently, placing a variety of food in front of them. Fresh fruits, delicate pastries, steaming bowls of porridge, and a selection of teas. But despite the opulence of the meal, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she was an intruder in this world. Sun Jun continued to chat animatedly with Sun Wei, though the eldest son remained largely silent, his attention divided between his younger brother and his plate. Lena glanced at him, taking in his sharp features, his strong jawline, the slight furrow of his brow, and the ever-present air of authority he carried. There was a coldness to him that she had always been drawn to, a mystery she had never been able to unravel. But that was before. Before she knew the truth about how things were supposed to unfold, before she understood that she had to let go of any feelings she might still have for him. Her mind drifted back to the memories that had flooded her when she first woke up in this world. Lena's son, the orphan daughter taken in by the Sun family as an act of obligation rather than affection. The love she had once harbored for Sun Wei, a love that was never reciprocated, never even acknowledged. The realization hit her hard, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. She couldn't continue down this path. She wouldn't. Lena, Sun Yi's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. You seem distracted. Do you not wish to join in the conversation? Lena blinked, realizing she had been staring off into space. She forced a smile, her throat tight. Apologies, father. I was just thinking. About what? Sun Yi's tone was direct, probing. I was just considering the future, father, Lena said quickly, her words a practiced response. I've been thinking about how I might contribute to the family's endeavors. There was a pause as Sun Yi regarded her with an inscrutable gaze. Finally he gave a curt nod. Good. I expect you to be more involved. We have many expectations for you, Lena. Don't forget your place. Lena's heart sank at the underlying meaning in his words. She had always been reminded of her position in this family, her status as an outsider despite the privileges she had been given. But today it felt different. The weight of those expectations seemed heavier, more oppressive. As the conversation around the table shifted to other matters, Lena's attention inevitably returned to Sun Wei. He had barely acknowledged her since she entered the room, but there was something about the way his gaze flickered in her direction every so often. Was it curiosity? Confusion? Or perhaps something else? For the first time in a long time, Lena felt a stirring of hope, a flicker of possibility. Could things really be different this time? But she quickly pushed the thought aside. No. She couldn't go down that road again. She had made a promise to herself. And as long as Sun Wei remained the aloof, distant figure he had always been, that promise would be easy to keep. Chapter 3. Breaking the Pattern. The sun had barely risen when Lena stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair with an air of quiet resolve. The quiet morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows on her face. Her reflection seemed different today somehow. It was as if, in the span of a single night, a new version of herself had emerged, one that was no longer tethered to the past. For the first time, Lena felt the weight of her emotions lift, even if only slightly. The storm of feelings she had harbored for Sun Wei, feelings that had plagued her for so long, felt like a distant echo. The girl who had once thought herself incapable of living without him was no more. She had made a decision. I'm done, she whispered to her reflection. She would no longer allow her life to be dictated by someone who could never return her feelings. The truth was undeniable. Sun Wei, the eldest son of the Sun family, would never look at her the way she had always hoped. He had his own life, his own desires. And she, Lena, was nothing more than an orphan in his eyes, an adopted daughter, an outsider. She had read the original story and it had always ended with heartache and regret. But now she had the chance to rewrite that ending. The first step was simple but the most difficult one of all. She had to stop caring for him. Lena exhaled slowly, closing her eyes. It wasn't going to be easy. Every time she saw him, every time their eyes met, the old feelings would threaten to surface. But she had to be strong. For herself. That day, Lena made it her mission to break free from the pattern she had unwittingly fallen into. She would focus on herself, her future, and her independence. She would no longer linger in the shadows of Sun Wei's world, hoping for a glimpse of something more. She spent the next few days throwing herself into activities she had long neglected, studying, painting, and reading books on topics she had always found fascinating but never had the time for. She enrolled in a self-defense class, something she had always wanted to try but had always put off for reasons she couldn't even explain. Each step she took was an effort to reclaim her life, to regain control of the narrative that had so long been controlled by her feelings for Sunway. But the more Lena distanced herself from him, the more she realized how difficult it was to ignore the subtle pull he still had on her. Every time she was in the same room as him, her heart would skip a beat, and her thoughts would wander to the familiar, painful ache of wanting something she could never have. It was on the 4th day of her newfound independence that Lena realized something. She was being watched. Sunway, of course, had always had a knack for observing those around him. But lately his gaze on her had shifted, becoming more intense, more curious. He hadn't said anything, but Lena felt it. His eyes would linger just a moment longer whenever their paths crossed, and she could sense the confusion in the air whenever he spoke to her. "You're different," he said one evening, his voice low but sharp. He had approached her unexpectedly as she sat in the garden, her focus entirely on the book in her hands. Lena looked up, startled, but she quickly masked her surprise with a polite smile. "Different? How so?" Sunway's gaze was piercing, his brow furrowing as he studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You're more distant, colder even. You're not the same as you were before. What's happened?" Lena's heart stuttered, but she kept her composure. She had expected this. He would notice eventually. He was always so attuned to the people around him, even if he didn't care about them in the way they hoped. "I'm just focusing on myself," she said, her voice steady. She didn't look at him, didn't want him to see the flicker of emotion in her eyes. "I've been busy with my studies and other things." His eyes narrowed and he took a step closer, his presence looming. "Is that all?" he asked, a quiet frustration hidden beneath the question. Lena felt a surge of irritation rise within her but suppressed it. She couldn't afford to slip back into old patterns. "Yes, Sunway," she replied firmly, though her heart was still caught in the tight knot of their tangled past. "Just that." Sunway stood there for a moment, watching her as though trying to unravel the mystery of her sudden shift. But Lena didn't give him the satisfaction. She simply turned her attention back to her book, effectively ending the conversation. As she sat there, a strange feeling settled in her chest. The detachment was working. But it came at a cost. Lena couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, Sunway was puzzled by the changes in her. After all, he had never truly seen her for who she was. He had only ever seen her through the lens of the role she played in his life. The dutiful adopted daughter, the one who quietly watched him from the shadows. But now, she was making it clear that she would no longer be a passive participant in the narrative he had created for her. It was an odd sensation, almost like she was waking up from a long, dreamlike slumber. She was beginning to see herself as an individual, not as an extension of his life. Over the next week, Sunway continued to observe her from afar. His curiosity seemed to grow, as though her behavior was an enigma he couldn't solve. He started to seek out moments when he could speak to her, always with the same probing questions, always with the same tight-lipped frown. But Lena didn't engage the way she used to. She didn't fall back into the old patterns of nervous glances and long silences. She didn't let herself soften when he looked at her with that mix of disinterest and hidden curiosity. Instead, she threw herself into new pursuits. One evening, after finishing a painting she had been working on, Lena met someone new, a young man named Zhen who had recently moved to the city. He was charming in a quiet way, with a quick wit and a warm smile that was completely different from Sunway's aloof demeanor. Zhen's interest in her work was genuine, and he offered her constructive criticism that, for the first time, didn't feel like an obligation or a form of pity. As Lena spent more time with Zhen, something in her began to shift. He didn't know her past and he didn't look at her with the weight of history in his eyes. He was seeing her for who she was now, not the girl who had been tethered to Sunway, but a woman with her own passions, her own goals, and her own future. Zhen became a reminder of what life could be like outside of Sunway's shadow. He didn't ask anything of her. He didn't expect anything. He just wanted to know her for who she was. And that, for Lena, was the first taste of true freedom. Chapter 4. The First Signs of Change. Lena had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control, but lately things seemed to be slipping out of her grasp. It was only a few weeks ago that she had made the decision to break free from the web of her unrequited love for Sunway. She had spent so many years pining after him, investing all her emotions into someone who could never return them, and now she was finally starting to feel the weight of that love lift off her shoulders. But just as she had begun to feel the faintest stirrings of independence, she noticed something she hadn't anticipated. Sunway's sudden attention. At first it was subtle. A lingering glance here, a question asked there. Nothing overt but enough to make Lena uneasy. She had done her best to avoid him, to maintain the distance she had so carefully crafted. But despite her best efforts, Sunway seemed to be everywhere she went. Whether it was in the garden where she'd been reading or in the hallway where she'd been walking, he would appear, always with that inscrutable look on his face, his dark eyes following her with an intensity she couldn't quite decipher. One evening, after a long day spent attending to her studies, Lena sat in the living room, absently flipping through a book. She was trying to focus on the pages in front of her, but the feeling that someone was watching her had become impossible to ignore. She lifted her gaze slowly and there he was, standing in the doorway looking as composed as ever, but with something new in his eyes. Curiosity. Busy. Sunway's voice was calm, his usual aloofness replaced by an edge of something unfamiliar. Lena couldn't tell if it was interest or something more unsettling. Lena closed the book and sat back, forcing herself not to react. She had expected this after all. He had to have noticed the change by now. Just trying to get some work done, she replied, her tone flat, even though a small part of her heart fluttered at the sound of his voice. She hated how easily it could still affect her. Sunway didn't move. He studied her for a long moment, his brow furrowed slightly as though trying to figure her out. I noticed something, he said, his tone slightly softer. You've been different lately. I haven't seen you around the way I used to. Lena forced a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. I've been busy, she repeated, more firmly this time, with my own things. He nodded slowly, still watching her with that unsettling intensity. I see, he murmured, though the puzzlement in his voice was undeniable. You've become distant. Lena's chest tightened, but she refused to let the old emotions take hold. I'm just trying to find my own path, she said, standing up and walking toward the window. She didn't want to face him directly, didn't want him to see the struggle in her eyes. I can't always be at the beck and call of others, Sunway. His eyes followed her every movement and for a moment, Lena could feel the tension thick in the air. It was strange, she had always thought that if she just distanced herself from him, if she stopped being so available, it would be enough. But now she wasn't so sure. She could see the shift in him. He was intrigued. He stood up straight, running a hand through his hair. Lena, he began, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. You don't have to act this way. You've always been dependable. I never imagined you'd pull away like this. Lena felt her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to keep her composure. I'm not pulling away, she said, her voice tinged with a hint of frustration. I'm just learning to stand on my own. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. But why now? What changed? His voice was soft, but there was a definite edge to it. You've always been there, ready to listen. And now you're different. It's like you're pushing me away. Lena felt a wave of irritation rise in her chest. He didn't get it. He had no idea what it felt like to constantly be in love with someone who didn't care. And now, just as she was starting to free herself from those feelings, he was pulling her back in. I'm not pushing you away, she said sharply, turning to face him. I'm just learning that I don't need to spend my life revolving around you. Sunway blinked, taken aback by her sudden intensity. For a moment there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Something between surprise and regret? Lena wasn't sure. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall, and a maid appeared in the doorway. Excuse me, Miss Lena, she said, glancing between the two of them. Your dinner is ready. Lena nodded curtly, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her at the interruption. Thank you, she said, then turned to Sunway. I'll be going now. Without another word she walked out, her heart pounding in her chest. As she made her way to the dining room, she felt the weight of Sunway's gaze on her back. The tension between them was palpable, and for the first time, Lena wasn't sure how to navigate it. The old feelings she had tried so hard to bury were resurfacing, and she was afraid of what might happen if she let them take root again. The next few days were filled with the same strange push and pull. Sun Wei's attention toward Lena was undeniable. He would find excuses to speak with her, to ask about her day or her plans. His questions seemed harmless enough, but his eyes were always searching, always probing. And each time he spoke to her, Lena found it harder to keep her walls up. There was something about him now, something that felt different. His distance, his aloofness had softened, replaced by a curiosity that Lena couldn't quite place. He seemed unsure of himself, as though he didn't know what to make of the new Lena who had emerged in front of him. But Lena couldn't let herself be fooled. She had seen this before. The subtle shifts in his behavior, the way he would lead her to believe there was a chance, only to pull away when things got too close. She couldn't fall into that trap again. One afternoon, as she walked through the gardens, deep in thought, she caught sight of Sun Wei in the distance. He was standing near the fountain, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the flowing water. The sight of him, so alone and contemplative, struck her unexpectedly. Was this the same man who had so often seemed untouchable, so removed from the world around him? Lena's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what she was feeling. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even something else. But she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the same Lena who had once loved him without question. This was a different Lena, a woman who had chosen to take control of her own life no matter what. And she would not go back. Chapter 5. The Heart's Dilemma. Lena sat at the window of her room, the warm light of the setting sun spilling into the room. Her fingers drummed absently against the book in her lap, but her thoughts were far from the pages. For the past few days she had tried to convince herself that her growing feelings for Sun Wei were nothing more than a brief lapse in judgment, something she could easily ignore. But no matter how much she tried to push him from her mind, there was a nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach that refused to go away. It was frustrating. Every time she thought she had completely detached herself from him, something would happen to remind her that she had never truly stopped caring. The sound of footsteps outside her door made her glance up, her heart skipping a beat before she could stop herself. She had been expecting him, though she had hoped to avoid this exact moment. When the door opened, Sun Wei entered without waiting for an invitation, his usual confident stride softened by an almost hesitant air. He looked at her with those familiar dark eyes, but today there was something different in his gaze. Something deeper, as if he were searching for an answer that neither of them had yet found. Lena put the book aside and stood up, trying to push the emotions back down. "I've been busy," she said, her voice light, almost too light. "You should probably go." But Sun Wei didn't move. He simply studied her for a long moment, and Lena felt the weight of his gaze pressing against her like a tangible force. His lips parted as if to say something, but no words came immediately. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Why are you avoiding me, Lena?" Lena's breath hitched and she forced herself to remain calm. She had been expecting this conversation, but that didn't make it any easier. "I'm not avoiding you," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I just don't think it's healthy for either of us to keep pretending that everything is the same." "Same?" Sun Wei echoed, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm not pretending. You just want to know why I've changed," Lena interrupted, her tone sharper than she intended. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not the same person I was before. And I'm not going to just go back to being the girl who fawned over you, Sun Wei." He took a step forward, his expression softening. "But why not? What changed? You can't tell me you don't feel anything. It's obvious that something's different between us." Lena's chest tightened at his words. "Why not?" The question echoed in her mind, rattling around in her thoughts like a dangerous refrain. The truth was, she did feel something she had tried so hard to deny. But that didn't mean she was ready to fall back into the same destructive pattern. "I feel something," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that's the problem. I feel too much. And I'm afraid that if I give in to those feelings again, I'll just lose myself." Sun Wei's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Lena could have sworn she saw vulnerability in them, a side of him she had never fully seen before. "Lena, I don't want you to lose yourself. But I don't know why you're shutting me out like this. I don't understand what's happening between us." The sincerity in his voice almost made Lena want to believe him. Almost. But she had learned the hard way that believing in something or someone could be a dangerous game. You don't understand because you don't have to, Lena replied, trying to distance herself from the growing ache in her heart. You've never had to worry about putting yourself first, Sunway. You've never had to make the hard choices that come with loving someone who can't love you back. Sunway's jaw tightened, and for the first time he looked uncertain, genuinely uncertain. Lena, I never wanted you to feel like that. I didn't know. Exactly, Lena interrupted, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts. You didn't know. You never asked. And now, when I'm trying to protect myself, you're still here, pulling me back into a place I can't go again. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken emotions, with things they both wanted to say but couldn't quite bring themselves to. Finally, Sunway stepped back, running a hand through his hair, a frustrated sigh escaping his lips. I don't understand why you're making this so difficult, Lena. All I want is to be close to you. Lena's heart twisted at the words, but she hardened her resolve. She couldn't afford to give in. Not again. You want to be close to me but only on your terms, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I can't live my life on anyone's terms but my own. Sunway stood there, staring at her as if trying to come to terms with what she had just said. After a long pause he spoke again, his voice more measured, though still tinged with frustration. So what now? You're just going to shut me out completely? Walk away without even giving us a chance? Lena felt a pang of guilt, but she fought to keep it in check. She had made up her mind. She had to protect herself even if it meant cutting ties with him completely. Yes, she said softly, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I have to find myself again, Sunway. Without you. The silence that followed was deafening. Sunway looked at her for what seemed like an eternity, his expression unreadable. Finally he nodded slowly, though there was a sadness in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. I don't understand you, he said quietly, but I can't change how I feel. I'll be here, Lena. If you ever change your mind. Lena's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. I won't, she replied firmly. I need to be alone for a while. To figure things out. Without another word, Sunway turned and walked out of the room, leaving Lena alone with her turbulent thoughts. Lena collapsed onto the bed, her heart racing. Why did it still hurt so much? She had told herself 100 times that she was done with Sunway, that she was stronger than her feelings. But the truth was, the more she tried to shut him out, the more her heart rebelled against her. She could feel the old love bubbling up, twisting in her chest. She had made the decision to protect herself, to preserve her independence. But at what cost? The next few days were filled with a strange mixture of relief and longing. Lena threw herself into her studies and hobbies, but every time she saw Sunway, her heart would skip a beat. The space between them had widened, but it felt like a chasm she was unwilling or unable to cross. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on herself, her thoughts always returned to him. And just like that, the conflict between her past feelings for Sunway and her present resolve to remain independent began to feel like an impossible battle. One that Lena wasn't sure she was winning. Chapter 6. A Tipping Point. Lena's fingers gripped the edge of the table as she scanned the room. Tension hung thick in the air, palpable and suffocating. She had known that something was brewing, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly it would come to a head. The Sun family estate, usually a picture of opulence and calm, was in turmoil. Lena's eyes darted to the other family members scattered throughout the room. Her adopted father, the elder Mr. Sun, looked grim as he spoke in hushed tones with his advisors. Sunway, however, stood at the back of the room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw set in a way that made him appear more like a stranger than the man she had spent so much time with recently. The situation at hand was dire. It seemed that one of the family's major business ventures had come under attack. An adversary from a rival family had made a bold move, orchestrating a smear campaign against the Sun family's most profitable asset. Lena had only heard bits and pieces, but the implications were serious. The family's financial reputation and with it their legacy was at risk. And now everyone was scrambling to put out the fire. Miss Lena, a voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see one of the servants standing at the door. The young master requests your presence. He insists it's urgent. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying to avoid Sunway for the past few days, ever since their last conversation. But now, faced with this crisis, she had no choice but to comply. She quickly followed the servant to the study where Sun Wei was waiting. He was pacing back and forth, his eyes dark and intense, the tension in his posture as tight as a coiled spring. When he saw her enter, he stopped abruptly, turning to face her. His eyes softened for just a moment before the mask of determination returned. "Lena," he said, his voice clipped, "we need to work together on this." Lena paused in the doorway, surprised by the directness in his tone. "Work together?" she repeated. "On what exactly?" "The situation with the business. We have to act fast or we'll lose everything," Sun Wei said, stepping closer. His usual coldness was gone, replaced by a sharp urgency. "We can't afford to let this drag on. We need to shut down the rumors before they gain more traction. And we need your help." Lena frowned, her eyes narrowing. "And what do you want me to do?" He exhaled sharply as if gathering his thoughts. "I need you to help me handle the public relations side of things. You're smart and you understand how to navigate delicate situations. We can't afford to waste any time. This could ruin the family." Lena's heart was still heavy with the weight of their last conversation, but she knew he was right. The family's reputation and perhaps even their livelihood depended on what they did now. She swallowed the frustration that bubbled up inside her. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "But after this we go back to where we were. No more distractions." Sun Wei looked at her intently but didn't argue. "Deal." Hours later, Lena found herself sitting next to Sun Wei in the Sun family's office, reviewing documents and formulating a strategy to combat the growing rumors. The urgency of the situation had pushed them into a space where there was no time for distractions, no room for personal issues. It was just the two of them working together in the cramped, cluttered room filled with papers and half-empty cups of coffee. Lena's mind was spinning, the weight of their task bearing down on her. But despite the tension of the moment, she couldn't help but notice how different Sun Wei seemed in this environment. He wasn't the same aloof young master who had once dismissed her at every turn. Here in this crisis he was focused, determined and, dare she admit it, vulnerable. His brow furrowed as he read through a particularly damaging piece of correspondence. "If we don't get a statement out by tomorrow, it'll be too late. They'll have already cemented their narrative," he muttered under his breath, running a hand through his hair. Lena leaned forward, scanning the document. She could feel the pressure mounting, but she also saw a side of Sun Wei she hadn't truly seen before. This wasn't the man who had once brushed her off or taken her for granted. This was a man fighting for his family, for everything he held dear. It was raw. It was real. And it unsettled her. "You're right," Lena said, her voice softer than she intended. "We need to act fast. But we can't just push out a generic response. It has to be personal. It has to be convincing." Sun Wei met her gaze, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite place. "Then we'll do it together," he said, his voice steady. She nodded, feeling a shift between them. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt like they were partners. No longer the distance between them filled with unanswered questions and old hurts. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes and something inside her softened. As the hours passed, they worked tirelessly, bouncing ideas off each other, crafting statements and strategizing their next steps. The sense of collaboration, of mutual trust, began to build between them, and Lena could feel the walls she had erected around her heart slowly starting to crumble. At one point, Lena looked up from the papers she was reviewing, catching Sun Wei in a moment of rare stillness. He wasn't looking at the papers, he was looking at her. "Why are you staring at me?" she asked, surprised by the vulnerability in his gaze. He hesitated, then gave a small, almost self-deprecating smile. "I don't know," he admitted. "You're different when you're like this. I never realized how capable you are." Lena felt a warm flush creep up her neck. It was strange to hear him speak to her like this, like she was more than just the girl who had always been around. For the first time she could see the genuine respect in his eyes. "Don't make me regret this," she said with a half-smile, trying to keep the situation light despite the growing tension between them. Sun Wei chuckled softly, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift. "I won't," he promised, his voice sincere. The night stretched on, the two of them working through the crisis with a focus and intensity that neither had expected. As the hours passed, Lena found herself looking at Sun Wei in a new light. He wasn't just the son of a powerful family anymore. He was a man trying to protect everything he loved, his family, his reputation, his future. And somewhere in the midst of their work she realized something else. Maybe she had been wrong about him. Maybe the cold, distant image she had built of him wasn't the whole truth. As the first light of dawn began to break through the windows, signaling the end of their marathon session, Lena found herself sitting next to Sun Wei, the weight of the night's work still heavy on her shoulders. "I think we've done all we can for tonight," she said, her voice tired but satisfied. Sun Wei nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "We make a good team," he said, his tone low. Lena smiled, though there was a slight hesitation in her voice. "Yeah, I think we do." But beneath her calm exterior, her heart was in turmoil. The trust, the vulnerability they had shared tonight. It was dangerous. And yet, as the daylight filtered into the room, she knew one thing for certain. Everything between them had changed. Chapter 7: The Heart's Truth. Lena stood by the window, staring out at the sprawling grounds of the Sun family estate, the last rays of sunlight casting a warm glow over the landscape. Her mind was racing. She had spent so many days trying to convince herself that her feelings for Sun Wei were nothing more than a passing phase, a result of the circumstances and the closeness they had shared during their recent collaboration. But the truth was undeniable now. Her heart ached when he wasn't around, and every moment with him felt like a push and pull that she couldn't escape. The problem was she didn't know if he felt the same way, or if he was simply toying with her. Was he just chasing her out of pride? It was a thought that gnawed at her, making her hesitate. She had to know the truth. She couldn't keep hiding from it anymore. If she was going to move forward with her life, whatever that meant, she needed to confront him, to face the truth once and for all. The sound of footsteps behind her made her heart leap in her chest, and she turned to see Sun Wei standing in the doorway, looking as composed as ever, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "Lena," he said softly, his voice low, "can we talk?" The way he said it, the quiet urgency, made her pulse quicken. She nodded, stepping away from the window, her heart pounding in her chest. "About what?" she asked, her voice more guarded than she intended. Sun Wei hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "About us," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made her breath catch in her throat. Lena felt her stomach tighten. She knew what this was. She had been waiting for this moment, and yet, now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready. "What about us?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though it wavered slightly. Sun Wei began, but then he trailed off, his brow furrowing. It was rare for him to be at a loss for words, and the vulnerability in his expression made Lena's heart ache. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said quietly, trying to lighten the moment, but inside her emotions were a storm. "I don't want to make it hard," he replied, his tone softening. "I want to be honest with you, Lena. About how I feel. About everything." Lena looked at him, her breath shallow. She had to fight the urge to back away, to shield herself from the rawness she could feel coming from him. But this time she wouldn't run. "Go ahead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sun Wei stepped closer, the distance between them closing with each word. "I've been trying to figure this out. What's been happening between us? And I realized something. I've been chasing you not because of pride, not because I think you're a challenge. I've been chasing you because I can't get you out of my head. Because every time you push me away, it feels like a part of me is missing." Lena's chest tightened. The words she had been waiting to hear, the truth she had been hoping for, were finally coming to the surface. But the question still lingered in her mind. Was he truly saying these things because he cared? Or was he just trying to win her over, to prove something to himself? "Sun Wei," she started, but her voice faltered, unsure if she could take the leap into this conversation. He reached out then, gently cupping her face in his hands, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "I know I've been distant and I know I've hurt you before, Lena. But I need you to know that I care for you more than I've ever cared for anyone. And I don't want to lose you." Lena's heart raced, the weight of his confession sinking in. She had never seen this side of him, the vulnerable, open side of him that was now laid bare before her. "Do you?" she whispered, looking up into his eyes. "Do you really care for me? Or is this just something that's happening because I've been distant?" His expression softened, and for the first time there was no mask, no cold detachment. Just sincerity. "It's not about pride, Lena. It's not about proving anything. I care about you deeply. I've never been good at showing it, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. And I don't want to let you go without at least knowing if you feel the same." Lena's breath hitched. Her emotions were a whirlwind, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a sense of peace within the chaos. She had been running from her feelings, from the vulnerability that came with them, but now in this moment she couldn't deny it any longer. "I do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I care about you too, Sunway. I've just been scared." Sunway smiled, a rare softness in his eyes, as if a weight had lifted off his shoulders. His hands dropped from her face, and for a heartbeat they stood there, neither of them moving. Then, almost as if they were both drawn by some invisible force, they closed the distance between them. Before Lena could fully process it, Sunway leaned in, his lips brushing gently against hers. The kiss was hesitant at first, a question, a tentative exploration of the emotions that had built up between them. But then, as the seconds stretched on, it deepened, a mingling of longing and relief, a kiss that spoke of all the things they had left unsaid. Lena's heart fluttered in her chest as she responded, her hands finding his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss was everything: passion, vulnerability, and the realization that this was no longer about pride or games. It was about something real, something they both shared in that moment. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathing a little heavier, their foreheads resting against each other in a moment of quiet intimacy. "I've wanted that for so long," Sunway murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "But I never knew if you felt the same." Lena's heart swelled. "I do," she whispered back, her fingers lightly tracing the outline of his jaw. "I do feel the same." The room was silent for a long moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, filled with the unspoken promise of something new, something neither of them had fully understood until now. And in that moment, Lena realized that they had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The past, with all its doubts and fears, no longer had the same power over her. She wasn't running from him anymore. She was ready to embrace whatever came next. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. Lena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the past few weeks replaying in her mind. She had been on an emotional roller coaster, growing closer to Sunway, confronting her feelings and learning to let go of the past. But now, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt a sense of peace. She was no longer haunted by the ghosts of her old life. She had come to terms with the fact that she could shape her future. Her feelings for Sunway were real, and the possibility of building something beautiful with him felt like a dream she never thought could come true. It had been a few days since their emotional confrontation, and although the past still lingered in the background, there was a new energy between them. A sense of hope, of potential. They had become something more than just two people thrown together by circumstance. They were partners now, learning to navigate the complexities of love and trust. Lena smiled to herself as she heard a soft knock on her door. "Come in," she called, pushing herself up to sit in bed. The door opened and Sunway stepped inside, carrying a small bouquet of her favorite flowers, white lilies. His expression was a little hesitant, but his eyes softened when he saw her sitting there. "Morning," he greeted her with a soft smile. "Morning," Lena replied, her heart skipping a beat. There was something so genuine in the way he looked at her now, something she had never noticed before. It made her chest tighten in the most pleasant way. "I thought you might like these," he said, holding out the flowers to her. "I know it's a small thing, but I wanted to remind you that you're important to me." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had always been the one to shy away from such gestures, but now, seeing Sunway's sincerity, it made her heart swell. She took the flowers from him, her fingers brushing against his in the process. "They're beautiful," she said softly, the warmth in her voice a reflection of the feelings she couldn't keep hidden anymore. Sunway stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, looking at her with that familiar intensity that made her pulse race. "Lena, I know I haven't always been the easiest person to understand," he began, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "But I want you to know that I'm here. For you. For us." Lena looked up at him, her heart opening even more. She had never imagined hearing those words from him, not in the way he was saying them now. It wasn't just about pride or duty. It was about him wanting to be with her, truly wanting to be with her. "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm here too." The two of them stood there for a moment, the words unsaid lingering between them, but the depth of their understanding was all that was needed. Then, without warning, Sunway took a step forward and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle yet sure. The world around them seemed to disappear as his gaze fixed on her lips. She didn't need to think. She knew what was about to happen and she welcomed it with all her heart. "Lena," he whispered, his voice low, his breath brushing against her skin. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Don't ever doubt that." And then, without any more hesitation, he leaned in and kissed her. It was slow and tender at first, a soft, lingering kiss that sent a shiver down her spine. His lips moved against hers with a quiet passion, a promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. She melted into the kiss, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer, deepening the connection between them. As the kiss broke, Lena's chest was rising and falling in a gentle rhythm, her lips tingling from the closeness. She looked up at him, her heart racing. "I'm not going anywhere," Sunway murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Not now, not ever." Lena's heart swelled with joy and she smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm glad," she whispered. He kissed her again, this time more urgently, the passion growing between them. It was a kiss filled with all the things they had never said before. All the pain, the doubt, and the hope that had bloomed from their shared vulnerabilities. They were no longer the people who had been lost in the past. They were a new version of themselves, together. Days passed and the connection between Lena and Sunway only deepened. They spent more time together, getting to know each other in a way they never had before. They talked about their hopes, their dreams, and the future they wanted to build. They learned to communicate openly, to be vulnerable with each other in a way that felt right. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when Lena would catch herself worrying about what the future might hold. But Sunway was always there, grounding her with his unwavering support. He was patient, kind, and understanding in a way that made her feel like she could be herself completely. And Sunway too began to change. The cold, distant young man who had once kept everyone at arm's length was slowly replaced by someone who was more open, more caring. He was no longer afraid to express his feelings, to show her how much she meant to him. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. One evening, as they sat on the terrace of the estate, watching the sunset together, Sunway turned to Lena with a small smile. "I've been thinking about something," he said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "What is it?" Lena asked, intrigued. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said, his voice low but steady. "I know we're just starting this journey together, but I can't imagine my future without you in it. Will you be with me? Always?" Lena's heart fluttered in her chest and she took his hand in hers. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of conviction. "I want that too." And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they both knew that their future was brighter than either of them had ever imagined. Final. A love rekindled. The days following Lena and Sunway's heartfelt confessions were like a dream come true. Each moment spent together deepened the bond between them, and though their pasts were filled with uncertainty and struggle, their present was nothing short of extraordinary. Lena had spent so much of her life running from the past, afraid of what it might do to her future. But now, in the warmth of Sunway's arms, she was finally free from its chains. The world outside felt brighter somehow, clearer, more vibrant, as though everything was finally falling into place. She had always been an outsider in the Sun family, unsure of her place in the world, but now as she stood beside Sunway, she felt grounded. She felt as though she belonged not only to him but to herself. It was a quiet evening, the kind that felt both peaceful and full of promise. The sun was setting over the horizon, casting the world in hues of pink and orange. Lena stood at the edge of the terrace, her hands resting on the railing, looking out over the estate. She could feel Sunway standing behind her, his presence comforting as always. "You seem lost in thought," he said softly, his voice warm as he leaned against the railing beside her. Lena turned to look at him, a soft smile curving on her lips. "I was just thinking about everything. About how far we've come." He tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. "It's been quite the journey, hasn't it?" She nodded, her eyes finding his. "Yes. But I think I'm finally at peace with everything." Sunway reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You should be," he said quietly. "You've worked so hard to find your place in this world. And now you've got everything you need right here." Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She knew he was right. Her journey had been long and at times painful. But now, with Sunway by her side, it felt like everything had come full circle. The uncertainty, the confusion, and even the heartache. Those were just chapters in a story that had led her here. To this moment. To him. "Sometimes I still think about everything that happened before," she said softly, her voice tinged with a hint of vulnerability. Sunway's gaze softened and he stepped closer to her. "You've always been in control, Lena. Even when you didn't realize it. You fought for what you wanted, for your own happiness, and look where you are now. You're stronger than you know." Lena's heart fluttered at his words. She had spent so many years feeling like she didn't belong, like she was just a shadow in someone else's life. But now she saw the truth. She was the one who shaped her own destiny. And she had chosen to be here with him. "I'm glad I'm here," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if afraid the moment might slip away if she said it too loudly. Sunway smiled, the warmth of his affection filling the space between them. "Me too," he murmured before he leaned down, his lips brushing against her forehead in a soft, lingering kiss. "I'm not going anywhere. You and we're in this together." The kiss was simple, yet it carried all the weight of their shared journey, all the love they had discovered along the way. Lena closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the full depth of his words, of the promise he had made. The past no longer held her captive. The future was open, full of possibilities. As the days turned into weeks, Lena and Sunway continued to build their life together. They spent time with the Sun family, and while their relationship was still a delicate balance, it no longer felt like she was an outsider. She was finally a part of something. A family, yes, but also a life that was her own, with Sunway by her side. And though there were moments of tension, as there would always be in any relationship, the foundation they had built was strong. Trust. Understanding. Love. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, Sunway looked at her with a gleam in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he began, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Lena raised an eyebrow. "What about?" "About the future," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "What comes next for us?" Lena's heart skipped a beat at his words, but she didn't hesitate. "We make it whatever we want it to be," she replied, her voice full of conviction. "We create our own future." Sunway's smile softened and he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers once more. This kiss, unlike the others, was full of promises for the future. Of adventures they would share, of challenges they would face together, of the love that would continue to grow between them. When they pulled apart, Lena rested her forehead against his, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "Together," she whispered. He nodded, his voice soft but filled with certainty. "Always." The time travel aspect, which had once seemed like an insurmountable puzzle, was no longer something Lena felt tethered to. She had come to accept that her journey through time was part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had learned that the true power didn't lie in being able to change the past, but in her ability to shape the future. And in that future there was Sunway, her partner, her equal, her love. In the quiet moments they shared, Whether it was watching the stars together or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence, Lena realized that this was what it had all been for. This peace, this love, this connection. This was the future she had been meant to find. The days passed and Lena grew more and more certain that this was where she was meant to be. She had faced the demons of her past, fought her inner battles, and now, with Sunway at her side, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The story of her life had taken many unexpected turns, but it had led her here, to love, to hope, to the future. And as she and Sunway stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon once more, Lena knew that their love was just beginning. No longer bound by the past, they were free to write their own story together.